I'm calling this more than a feeling and food and mood. So what's really interesting is that one of my favorite books that I read was called Molecules of Emotion by, God rest her soul, the late Candace Pert. Candace Pert is really an interesting woman because she is the person who discovered opioid receptors. And she did it way back when. And she realized that all of our feelings are actually neurotransmitters and that they have two functions, a physiological function and an emotional function. So when they bind in your limbic system, which is where you kind of have feelings, you have a feeling like we have here, all of these possible things of how you might feel, but they also have emotion, they also have physiological feelings. And that's what we're going to talk about. What are these physiological feelings and how can we manage our emotional feelings by what we put in our body? So one of the things that's really important to understand about how do neurotransmitters and feelings actually work is that nerves have two things that are going on at the same time. This is from Georgia Austin. She and I got our master's in nutrition together, and I have this by permission. So this right here is called the presynaptic terminal. And intriguingly, this amino acid, tryptophan, is a precursor to serotonin. And so we're going to talk a lot about foods that are high in tryptophan. And what happens is that when tryptophan is made in this presynaptic neuron, what happens is that it gets released here as a neurotransmitter, and then it binds to this called the postsynaptic receptor. And then we have the feeling, I'm happy or calm. And so it's a really interesting thing. So how can we support that process that we just saw? Because you would think this would just be really easy, but it's not quite as simple as it looked in that diagram. The first thing is you have to make the neurotransmitter. To make the neurotransmitter, take mitochondria, and mitochondria need the B vitamins, B1, B2, B3, energy. The mitochondria also need coenzyme Q10, which all of us can make as long as we have vitamin C, as long as we have magnesium, but most importantly, as long as we don't take a drug that interferes with cholesterol synthesis. So if I'm on a statin drug, or I'm on metformin, or I'm on a beta blocker, bizarrely, I cannot make CoQ10. And now I'm going to not be able to manufacture my neurotransmitters. And intriguingly, I need omega-3, either flax seeds or fish oils, so that I have a really good membrane so it easily can be released. And because mitochondria are highly dependent on your thyroid, I have to have good thyroid function. And if somebody wants to buzz in, just let me know. Next, what happens is I have to go across the synapse, and that requires mineral balance. In order to go across that synapse, I have to have a yin-yang balance between calcium and magnesium and sodium and potassium. The latest literature is really saying that for a lot of people, you can either have a 2-to-1 calcium to magnesium, and some of us need as much as a 1-to-1 calcium to magnesium when we're looking at it in any one meal or how we want to do it, so that calcium, which tends to be outside the cell, and magnesium that's inside the cell, that's going to help that balance. And since last year, we know that sodium should be slightly less than potassium in your diet. So you want to have a 1-to-1 or 1 to maybe up to 1.5. And so if I had 1,200 milligrams of sodium, then I want to have like 1,500 milligrams of potassium in a day. I actually keep track of that because these are really important to have these mineral balances. So we don't want to be taking 1,200 milligrams of calcium and no magnesium. That is not good, especially for women, because then we don't have the right balance. And finally, we need the neurotransmitter to actually bind to the receptor so that we get the actual impact. And that needs protein. That's the receptor. And then again, we need omega-3s, either fish oils or flaxseed, or those, you can have vegetarian omega-3s, but you have to have omega-3s. They make a fluid membrane. And the reason I want a fluid membrane is that's like a catcher who can move around and catch it. If that postsynaptic membrane has too many saturated fats, it's hard for the receptor to move in that membrane and actually catch the neurotransmitter because it's kind of being thrown across that space. And so we want a very limber catcher. What happens then is that in order to have a really good response, again, we want that nice fluid membrane. We either ate fish or we had good omega-3s. We need those B vitamins, again, in the mitochondria, so we have energy. And then what's really interesting is many cells need this really interesting thing called inositol. Inositol is kind of this sweet tasting, not actually a sugar, but it allows things to move through the system. Inositols are very important to move blood from your heart up to your brain, to move food through your intestines. And so inositol is really high in dried fruit like raisins and dried apricots. It's really high in cantaloupe and citrus. And it's really interesting to just type in sometimes food sources of inositol. And that really, really helps. I know that somebody's inositol deficient when they can't remember their nouns, when they can't go to the bathroom, they can't poop every day. Both getting the blood up to your brain and getting the food, the feces through your colon is an inositol dependent pathway in the muscle that's pushing that information against gravity. Now, what do I get? I get a psychological, a physiological, and an emotional response. And what's very interesting is James Moss at Cornell showed that you need to sleep 7 to 8 hours every night. He showed that GPA at Cornell is correlated to one and only one thing, and that was hours of sleep. He showed that in the last hour of sleep, either that hour 6 to 7 or 7 to 8, calcium rushes in to what's called the presynaptic terminal, and you get a better release of your neurotransmitter that facilitates learning, and that facilitates not just only memory learning, but motor learning. He was the person who worked with Tanya Harding. He had her stop getting up in the middle of the night to do her skating lessons. And she was able to then sleep, make that memory, and do her triple axel, which she was having trouble with. He was with the Miami Heat. He made huge changes in these elite athletes by changing how much they sleep. Let me just see what the chat says. Inositol at night with magnesium. Zach, that's an interesting idea. It isn't actually what I tend to do with inositol. Magnesium, very important to sleep because of the NMDA receptor. Inositol more to move things through any hollow organ like blood vessels and the intestines. So you could do it. You could do some at night. In the evening, you could have some dried fruit in the evening, but it doesn't seem as time dependent on inositol as it does for magnesium. So important on magnesium to calm down the NMDA receptor at night. Anyway, James Moss said that for every hour less than 7 that you sleep, what's super interesting is it's equivalent to 1 beer. And so you just don't think well when you don't have enough sleep. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So my students took an exam today, and if they didn't do well and they only slept 5 hours, then basically they were basically taking that exam on 2 to 3 beers, and that might explain their grade. Is that cool? All right, now, anxiety and depression are not the same thing. This is a very important differential diagnosis. If we are diagnosing ourselves or we're diagnosing someone else, we have to be very, very cautious on what is actually the cause of the problem. They are done by different neurotransmitters. When I wrote this PowerPoint in 2023, a year ago now, it turns out that 19.1% of people in the last year had been diagnosed with any type of anxiety, which turns out to be 46.5 million adults. And 7.5 7.1% in the last year had one major depressive episode, or 17.3 million adults. And some people could have both. Why is it so important to differentially diagnose those? Because we have to treat them differently. If we treat somebody for anxiety, but they're depressed, that's not going to help them. But it's much worse to treat an anxious person with an antidepressant, because that can lead to them taking action that can lead to suicide. This is why antidepressants can cause suicide, which is really very worrisome. And you should, if you're on an antidepressant, be seeing a counselor at the same time so that they can really figure this out. So what happens is, it's always a balance. Neurotransmitters are in yin yang things, kind of like we don't want it to be too hot like Papa Bear, but also not too cold like Mama Bear. We want it to be Baby Bear, just right. And that is really how homeostasis works. They know there are 5 imbalance patterns in neurotransmitters. One is that we can have too much norepinephrine and not enough dopamine. So what happens is that if I have norepinephrine, that actually we're going to see that is the actual neurotransmitter of fear or anxiety. Anxiety is like fear of the dark. I don't know what I'm afraid of. It's not fight or flight. That's epinephrine. It's the thing right before that. And dopamine is the reward hormone. And so this is what makes us feel rewarded. Glutamate is super interesting because it's going to excite you. It's the most important excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. We want to be awake, but we also want to be focused. And glutamate is converted to GABA, which you have to make in the brain. You can't, there's a lot of things like, oh, you could take GABA. No, you have to make GABA. And this is a conversion. So first you have this, and then you do that. Now, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that when I have a lot of it, I'm going to have a feeling of panic. And when I don't have enough of it, I'm going to have a feeling of depression and worry. So serotonin, unfortunately, same neurotransmitter, there's a sweet spot. Too much problem, too little a problem, but very different problems. I'm not going to talk a lot about acetylcholine and melatonin. Melatonin's main problem, and I'm wearing my glasses on the computer because they have a lens in to block out the blue light. Blue light on your screens, that just gets rid of the melatonin, and now you can't fall asleep. Staying asleep is another problem, but falling asleep is a melatonin thing. And then the last one is, do I have too much inflammatory eicosanoids, they're called, or anti-inflammatory? So we want these to be balanced, and this is due again to the diet. So what's the first one? The first thing that people can have in their mood is they're quite anxious. They're always in fight or flight. They have trouble being in rest and digest. The problem with anxiety and always being in fight or flight is it is associated. It's not causative, but it's associated with addiction behaviors. And we'll talk about why that is. Then there's this kind of other kind of anxiety that's kind of due in worry and depressed because you're overthinking. You're a go, go, go. I just can't stop. I can't relax. I say I'm going to go to bed, but I go to every room in the house and I pick up and I'm cleaning this and I'm doing that and I'm answering my emails. And I say I'm going to go to bed, and 45 minutes later I go to bed, and the husband's like, where have you been? Right? Because you're doing this. And so they say this pattern could be related to a little bit of OCD, chronic pain, and a kind of anxiety that's not so much fight or flight as overthinking, coulda, woulda, shoulda. This one is an imbalance with the serotonin. I feel sick to my stomach. It's a gut feeling. We're going to see it's a gut feeling because serotonin is made in the gut, and keeping our gut happy and our gut healthy is going to be the #1 thing that's going to help us balance out our serotonin and not either be in panic and have the emotion, oh crap, or be depressed and worried, no crap, right? So it's really funny. I say that to the students, right? So this is why the kids, when all of a sudden they say, oh, S the bed, right? And that is this, I'm really, I did not do well, right? And then on on pattern 4, I'm having trouble with being in rest and digest, but actually getting a good night's sleep. This is called tired but wired. And then am I inflamed or not inflamed? So we're going to do these one at a time. The first thing I wanted to really let everyone know is where even am I in my body? I'm not everywhere in my body. Pattern 1, which was that generalized anxiety pattern where I am in fight or flight, that's called the sympathetic nervous system. The 2 places the sympathetic nervous system actually live in your body is in what's called your sympathetic chain ganglia. That's right between your shoulders down to your low back. When you're like, oh, I just can't, you're in that forward posture, you're in that fight or flight pose. This is opposed to those people who are quote unquote laid back. So if we all were to lay back on our chairs, we would actually relax our sympathetic chain ganglia. When we're sitting forward at our computer, really typing away like a crazy person, that's going to actually overstimulate your sympathetic chain ganglia. And bizarrely, you can get pattern number 1 posturally. They think this is what's happening to the kids on their phone, to me on my phone, or on our computers. We're always forward. We're always kind of curled up. We really want to have a better posture. And the second is our adrenal glands. In our adrenal glands, we actually make adrenaline. In our sympathetic chain ganglia, we make norepinephrine, the chemical just before adrenaline. Pattern number 2, sadly, is in our head, right? This is where it's a dangerous neighborhood in my head. I tend to have a lot of this. This is called the glutamate dominance, where we're going to see that we're always thinking. And somebody's chatting in for a second. So Elizabeth asked, is posture correlated with the dysfunction? I'm going to stop the share for a second because I want us all to practice this. It turns out Dr. Andrew Leeds, who is a psychiatrist who does EMDR for post-traumatic stress disorder, showed posture is causative. So I want us all to do this for a second. I want you all to go into a fight or flight pose and then try to say to yourself something nice. And if you go like this, you look great. No one believes you, right? So it turns out, and I have the kids do that. I'm like, do like this, put your fist up and lean forward and try to say something nice to someone. And everyone starts laughing because it's so out of character. Literally putting yourself in fight or flight. Then I have them do this, lean back and try to say something mean. It's really hard to do because you're laid back and it relaxes your sympathetic nervous system. It turns it off. And is that the coolest thing or what? This is why yoga is so good. This is why taking a deep breath is so good, because it's just calming down our nervous system. I had the kids today before their exam. They had to do 1 minute of mindfulness. They had to think about their happy place. They had to tell their body they're safe and breathe deeply for 1 minute. That's literally all it takes. That helps calm that nervous system down. It is postural. You can look it up. His name is Andrew Leeds, and write EMDR. And he, one of my patients is a therapist, and she's the one who told me about it. It was super cool. And I have to remember to really do that all the time, right? Because I can be too forward. So this is the go, go, go pattern. And then the last one is pattern number 3, your intestines. The number 1 place you make serotonin is your colon. Harvard showed that in 2003. And so they did it because they were saying, why are we having these issues when we give people things like Celexa and Prozac? Why are they having intestinal distress? And that's because serotonin is made in the colon. The other thing is that your parasympathetic system, if this is between your shoulder blades, to be in rest and digest, you have to have space. Look at this, between your head and your neck. What? That means when I have my shoulders way up at my ears, which by the end of the day, many of us do, that inhibits your vagus, which is calming your heart down. And now you're just kind of revved up. And then we're sitting all day. The other place that helps your colon work correctly is your sacral plexus. And my mnemonic is S2, S3, S4. keeps the poop off the floor. And so if we are sitting all day, we can really aggravate those nerves to the perineum, to our bladder, to our uterus, to our prostate, to our colon. All of those are there. So way up at the top of your neck, you can press those points there, right below your head, right where you get your neck. That is actually a gallbladder point in acupuncture, which I find really interesting when we're talking about the intestines, right? And the vagus nerve does all your organs all the way up until you get right below your spleen on the left side of your colon. And after that, it's your sacral plexus. So sitting too much is actually not good for you either. You got to get up from that computer, got to walk around, got to do like either lie on the floor and do a little yoga, or, wall sits, anything. We're going to have a better posture, a little better breathing. This is why all that's so important. All right. And then patterns 4 and 5 impact everything. Dr. Lissa Rankin, Lissa Rankin, wrote a book called Mind Over Medicine. And she said you cannot heal if you're constantly in a state of fight or flight. And you cannot get good quality sleep if you're in a state of fight or flight. So your sympathetic, fight or flight, and your parasympathetic are both supposed to be rest and digest, 50-50. So that when I have to get going, go up a little, and the other one goes down, and vice versa. But it has to be a healthy seesaw. And that actually is measured best by a thing called heart rate variability. Those studies are quite good these days. And a lot of those Fitbits, you can test your heart rate variability. You want it to be, it can go up when you need it, but it goes back to normal easily. It's when you're stuck in one or the other, either you just can't get up and go, or you just can't stop. That's when the problem comes in. And inflammation is the cause of all chronic pain. And because inflammation in the intestine can lead to a serotonin imbalance, which we're going to see shares biochemical pathways with anxiety, the gut-brain axis is incredibly important, and why we have to have a right gut microbiome. We want to have those good probiotics. We want to have fiber. We want to have anti-inflammatory herbs, have the colon be happy. Then the rest of the system is calmed down. So many of us today are a little bit too much fight or flight. The neurotransmitters that do that are called the catecholamines. They're made from an amino acid called tyrosine. What's interesting is this becomes this, becomes this, becomes this, becomes this. This is a B vitamin and vitamin C dependent pathway. And if we are making epinephrine or adrenaline, or we're making norepinephrine with our forward posture, we're going to preferentially use our B vitamins up for this pathway over energy for healing, for working out, and for getting other things done. My acupuncturist, when I'm in this state, says that she wanted to buy me a shirt that says catastrophizing is my cardio. So I love that. And yeah, that's when you're there. You know what that feels like. So when you're catastrophizing is your cardio, because adrenaline raises up your heart rate, you wait like, oh, this is the pattern I'm in. Problem is that this chemical here, dopamine, that is the reward hormone. That's when we feel satisfied and rewarded. And when we make norepinephrine and epinephrine, we ain't got no satisfaction. And then we can go into addiction behavior, because things that raise your dopamine is alcohol and marijuana and drinking and eating sugar and, sex and crying. So I tease my students, I call this the wine, dine, 69 and cry about it circuit. If you're doing that in an addiction way, you're like, whoa, hi, my name is Mary. I don't have enough dopamine. So it really helps out. So this is what it is. My dopamine is down and my epinephrine and norepinephrine or adrenalines are up. I am in fight or flight. I am not in rest and digest. And this is what we refer to as generalized anxiety disorder. It's only just this one neurochemical imbalance. What happens is that dopamine is necessary for pleasure for learning, for memory, and for motivation. So I want to have that, but it's also necessary for fine motor control. You know those days where you're shaky because without dopamine, you lose your capacity to keep your hand from shaking or your legs from shaking. And now you have that kind of restlessness. And that's because these chemicals are literally just one biochemical difference than the one before. And what's interesting about that, this one right here, this takes vitamin B1, this one takes vitamin C, and this one takes a thing called SAMe. This, when I convert norepinephrine to epinephrine or noradrenaline to adrenaline, I make a molecule called homocysteine that causes joint pain, osteoporosis, dementia, can't think, cardiovascular disease. It raises my risk of heart attack and stroke if I can't get rid of that homocysteine because I made too much adrenaline. And that takes my B vitamins, 6, 9, 12, the methylators. And a lot of people do not have those in either the right amount or the right category, the right type. Do I have vitamin B6 in the right form, or B9 or folic acid and B12? Super important to have all of that. And then what happens is people have behaviors that are going to artificially raise their dopamine. And they showed in rats will only push the lever for something that gives them dopamine. They will push the lever for heroin. They will push the lever for Oreos, intriguingly, but not for LSD. They just are not interested in that. There's no addiction or that, but it's really interesting. And thinking you're in love, intriguingly, makes your dopamine go up. That's why everybody likes being in the beginning of a relationship. That's a very dopamine part of the relationship. Now, norepinephrine, unfortunately, causes the blood vessels to constrict. We norepinephrine. And what happens is then we don't have enough blood to our brain so that we can actually pay attention. And this is why what I tell my students, if you have testing anxiety, you have to take a minute, you have to breathe, you have to lay back in your chair, you have to tell yourself you're safe so that you can get some blood to your brain. This is why when you're under a lot of stress and then later on you say, why didn't I say that? How come that happened? It's because you couldn't even think. You did literally not get enough blood to your brain. And then this here shuts off your digestion. So if you go all the way to epinephrine, now your hands are sweating, your armpits are sweating, and you literally cannot digest food even if you were to eat. So we try not to get all the way to epinephrine. So we want to have this, where our dopamine and our norepinephrine and epinephrine are just right. We want to have enough of both. If we have too much dopamine, then basically we know those people, they're the addicts that are just sitting on the couch having, smoking marijuana or doing the gummies, and they can't do anything. They can't get off the couch. But then we have the people that can't sit down and watch even a 15-minute show because we're all the way over here because we just can't rest at all. So what about medication for that? This is the one that they give the benzodiazepines for. That's the Xanax and the Valiums and those. In the beginning, this was really how they handled everybody who had that. But the problem is that it really didn't work well in the long haul. The reason it didn't work in the long haul is that it turns out the benzodiazepines have a big side effect. And so what happened was in the beginning, they were like, well, we don't know, maybe it's working, we don't know if it's working. But right now, the benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium and those have fallen a bit out of favor because they are highly addictive. So what are we going to try to do instead? Not saying some people don't need it, but lifestyle wise, it's very important to get enough sleep. It's super important to exercise. It turns out when you exercise, you're using your norepinephrine and epinephrine for good, as they say. And so that's going to help the pathway work better. And we know that the people who go to the gym can actually be quite addicted to the gym. And so dopamine goes up when you exercise. So that's super cool. And mindfulness is really important. It's the only thing that works on meditation is mindfulness meditation. And people who pray, that's one of the most mindful things to do. So if there is a prayer that you love, great to do this because it really, really helps. So sleep, exercise, and then mindfulness meditation or prayer. We have to eat enough protein, but we have to be able to digest and absorb it. If we are so stressed out that we can't digest or absorb, we have to take a moment, do a little rest, and actually try to get ourselves in a rest and digest state so that we can. Sometimes what I'll suggest is have a little bit of apple cider vinegar before you eat. If you're really stressed out, that will actually, because it's a little bit acidic, it's going to tell your stomach, oh, you know what? You should actually make a little acid here. So you cannot make acid if you're too stressed out. The second thing is, unless you're going to put something in the blender, you're actually supposed to chew. I thought that was optional, but you're really supposed to chew. It's really important to chew to not have your colon inflamed. So if you're going to rush, and this is why I love having a shake, if I'm really rushing through lunch, it's better for me to put that fruit or the spinach or whatever in the shake and blend it, because I'm maybe not going to chew as well as I should for those carbohydrates, because carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth. And we want to have good fats. We want to have those polyunsaturated fats. And we don't want to have too many omega-6s, which comes in things like animal fats, and especially cow's dairy, and even chicken can have some, although it doesn't have quite as much, and then fish and flax seeds and some other things for omega-3. So we want to have a ratio like that. The typical of American diet could be 15 to 17 to 1, when really we want to have a 1-to-1 or at most a 4-to-1 ratio. So it's not no eggs, no meat, no chicken. We want to have those animal proteins. We just don't want to have them at such a high amount that we really have this massive inflammation to lack of inflammation. So if you're going to do fish oils, only 1 to 2 grams. Sometimes they'll tell you, oh, have 6 grams. I think that's way too much. And do I do this smoothie right away? No, I find that you can you can take over an hour to drink those. Somebody says, if you do put it in the blender, do you have to drink it immediately? I have not seen that you can have some time. When you see vitamin C, the RDA, what's so interesting about the vitamin C, the RDA for vitamin C is actually only 60 milligrams. Some people say you should have up to 1,000. Here's what I know. That one step, let me show you this step here if I can. The step that goes between dopamine and norepinephrine, that's a vitamin C dependent step. If you're craving sugar, every animal except human beings and guinea pigs and primates, that's the monkeys and the apes, can make vitamin C from sugar. I find if I have a really bad sugar craving, get the vitamin C gummies. Do one every 20 minutes till your sugar craving goes away. It really works each and every time. And it's really trying to get you to eat fruit. And fruit is anything that has seeds. So peppers are really good. And interestingly, Yukon Gold potatoes and sweet potatoes have quite a bit of vitamin C, as does celery. So I love celery. It's really great for this. So that's pretty cool, right? And then these are all your B vitamins that you want to have, but I don't really like them a lot more than 100% in a day, maybe up to 200. Now the RDA for magnesium is 400 to 600 milligrams a day. We want to have some magnesium during the day, but not too much, and more magnesium at night, but when we go to sleep, because we want to calm down a thing called the NMDA receptor we're going to see on the next slide or in the next pattern. Magnesium is really important to be absorbable. And so the form does matter on magnesium. So you want to do either chelated magnesium or magnesium citrate. Now, sadly, I found out that they can sometimes lie on the label, and they could say magnesium glycinate, which is the most absorbable, and they can put magnesium oxide, which is not absorbable at all, with glycine and call it magnesium glycinate. So you have to be very cautious. So I just have gone back to doing magnesium citrate because they cannot mess that up. So this is what we're saying, basically. Sleep, pray or meditate, eat healthy food, do exercise, and for women in particular, we want to do it with others. Women have more serotonin receptors than men. We just do better in a group. This is the one where you cannot turn your brain off. This is the biochemistry of what's called the glutamate receptor. Glutamate is the #1 most important excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. It turns your brain off on like a light switch, and GABA functions like the dimmer. So we're going to watch how this works because it's a really cool video, and I made sure it worked yesterday. So this is going to be good.
The NMDA receptor is one of two main kinds of receptors activated by glutamate. The other main kind of glutamate receptor is called the AMPA receptor. These two receptors, each with distinct physiological properties, often coexist at the same synapse. Shown here is a model synapse in the CA1 region of the hippocampus containing both types of receptors. Weak electrical stimulation of the presynaptic neuron causes the release of glutamate from the axon terminal. This glutamate binds to both AMPA and NMDA receptors. Although both NMDA and AMPA receptors are permeable to sodium and potassium ions, weak stimulation normally activates only the AMPA receptors, resulting in a slight depolarization of the postsynaptic neuron. When glutamate binds to the NMDA receptor at slightly depolarized or resting membrane voltages, very few ions flow through the channel. This low conductance occurs because the pore of the channel is blocked by magnesium ions, which prevents other ions from passing freely through the channel. Under such conditions, the EPSP will be mediated entirely by the AMPA receptors. Given a stimulus of sufficient strength or frequency, AMPA receptors can depolarize the membrane sufficiently to expel the magnesium from the NMDA channel. The NMDA channel now actively responds to glutamate, admitting not only sodium ions, but large amounts of calcium as well. The calcium acts as an important second messenger.
So I want to stop this because this is what's interesting. It turns out your number of AMPA receptors is how much you use that pathway. This is how learning occurs. Anything, if they say if you don't use it, you lose it. But if you do it all the time, you make more of these. The more of these that you have, the easier it is for you to stimulate your glutamate receptor and have your brain keep going. 80% of adult Americans are magnesium deficient. This means that this is not a ruly amount of sodium and calcium coming in here. Without enough magnesium, I over-respond. So instead of saying, when somebody asks me a question, what? I say, what? Because I'm all overstimulated. And that's what's really interesting about this pattern. Magnesium naturally occurs in anything that's green, that has chlorophyll in it, nuts, and chocolate. If you are like, oh my God, I just need more chocolate, it's very likely you're magnesium deficient. If you cannot stop the woulda, coulda, shoulda, likely magnesium deficient. And this is why they say you have to be a positive thinker, because then you're going to have more of these in that section of your brain. Whereas if you can be in that catastrophizing, then you're going to overstimulate that pathway. So whatever you do the most, that's what you're going to come to. So I see there's a question. And then Bernadette's asking me, what about buffered magnesium glycinated with taurine? You know what's interesting, Bernadette, about the whole thing about magnesium is there does seem that some people do better with the magnesium taurate. It made my intestines very unhappy. So you kind of have to try it out. Taurine is the most important anti-inflammatory amino acid for your white blood cells and for your heart. So it's an incredibly important and good neurotransmitter. It's really important to make bile so you can digest your fat. And I would have thought that would have been great for me. My intestines hated it. So I think you got to try it. So I just have people try some magnesium glycinate, try some magnesium citrate, try some chelated magnesium, try some buffered magnesium, try COMS, try magnesium citrate. Like, unfortunately, everybody's going to have to do what they have to do. And it's really to bowel tolerance. That's the only thing that goes wrong. And Rhonda's saying, what about magnesium threonate? Here's the problem with the glycinate, the threonates, those are amino acids. And what I found out from my vitamin person that we have custom vitamins made from, there is not as much supervision as there had been. And they can put magnesium in with an amino acid in magnesium oxide form, and then put any amino acid they want to put in there with it. When they do the studies, they make sure it's truly magnesium threonate, it's truly magnesium glycinate, it's truly magnesium taurate, but they don't have to. And that's a problem. And I don't really know the answer to that, is really what I want to say. Sorry, let me just turn this off here and escape from that. It's really upsetting to me that that's even possible and allowed. But that is the issue. I'm trying to see the chat there. So what do I need? I need that magnesium, but I need that calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium balance. And this is where all that new literature is showing, where we don't want to have 1,200 milligrams of supplemental calcium and then we didn't have enough magnesium. We don't want to have too much added sodium in our diet without having our 5 cups of fruits and vegetables, because we want to have that 1-to-1 or 1 to a little bit more than 1. And the same thing with this. We can have 2-to-1 on this, but we got to be cautious. Otherwise, we're going to feel a little bit hyper. So I'm go. I can't stop. This is true in chronic pain. This type of anxiety is different than the norepinephrine anxiety. This is the tired but wired kind of thing where I've got too much glutamate, cannot shut my brain off, and not enough focus. So I'm going from activity to activity. Nothing's really getting done. So I feel a little manic, or bizarrely, I feel a little depressed. That is glutamate GABA imbalance. I have to be really cautious because too much glutamate can cause you to be constipated. And without enough GABA, I'm going to not be able to sleep. What do I need to convert glutamate to GABA? So I've been excited. I can get up in the morning. It's not a no glutamate life. I want enough glutamate to get up and go. But I also then want to immediately, as soon as it tells that glutamate receptor to work, I want it to be immediately converted to GABA. That's a B1, B6, and manganese dependent pathway. What's interesting is manganese is naturally found in nuts and seeds. It's why I put it in the shake for this. B1 can be missing if I eat refined carbohydrates, and vitamin B6 can be easily depleted by birth control pills and hormone replacement therapy. This hormone replacement therapy causing severe B6 deficiency is why we can have so many problems on hormone replacement therapy. Yes, so on a keto diet, they're supposed to have 2 teaspoons of salt a day. And what about the potassium? You know, exactly. Bernadette, exactly. What about it? The paper that came out about the potassium, sodium potassium ratio, and blood volume, and therefore blood pressure, the #1 most problematic cardiovascular problem, just came out last year. I think that sometimes people get fixated on one and only one thing, and they're not looking at the big picture. And so we can really have a problem when we're just focusing on a fad. We're like, well, let's just, have enough sodium, but it's always a yin yang balance. We don't want to have sodium without potassium. We do not want to have calcium without magnesium. And it always goes awry. We have to have both. It's not one. Even this, we have to have glutamate or we'll never get out of bed, but we have to have GABA or we'll never go to sleep. So again, I want to be just right. I want to calmly think because I can focus. I'm going to have good quality sleep. I can do my tasks easily. I'm stable, I'm calm, I'm dependable, and I'm nurturing. You know, we're all expected to do this, but it is a glutamate GABA balance. It takes a lot of magnesium. I do 300 to 400 milligrams of magnesium every single day at night. Number one, because I love my coffee, and coffee depletes both magnesium and potassium. So I'm not willing to give up my coffee. So I just have a little bit more magnesium before I go to sleep. What's interesting is that this is where the benzos work on the GABA receptor, but they are highly addictive and they do bind here. So this is why I'll put this up and you can watch this later. It's just really going to show you that on this really interesting GABA receptor, this is where alcohol can bind. This is why you're like, I don't know, I just got to have a drink. It's going to both elevate your dopamine and do this. It's why it feels so much better. Sometimes you're like, I don't know, I just need one. And then Stacy's asking, what am I doing? I just have gone literally back to magnesium citrate from wherever I can get it, because I got very discouraged. I'd been doing magnesium glycinate, and the literature on magnesium glycinate is just stellar. Unfortunately, apparently they're not required to make it the way that they did in the study. So my glutamate, I got a little glutamate dominant on that one. So yeah, it's a problem. So again, this is where they're doing the benzos again for this, but unfortunately they know they're very, very addictive. And the problem is the benzos deplete melatonin. So now you're going to fall asleep, but you're going to have a terrible night's sleep. So, you know, I'm not against the benzo. Sometimes you need it because you know, it's alcohol or a benzo, I guess, if you're really struggling, but then you're going to run out of melatonin. So to have melatonin, you have to have tryptophan. So we're going to talk about that in a second, because tryptophan's our very next pattern. And then we can figure out what we need to do for that. But melatonin, very, very important to have good quality sleep. Melatonin is actually an antioxidant and cleans up the debris in your brain. Your brain is a construction zone all day long, and you need to clean that up at night. So you want to take the lowest possible dose of melatonin, and they really think that it's really important only do 1 milligram a day and 3 weeks on, 1 week off, because it seems it's not really good to take too much melatonin all the time. So how do I keep my glutamate GABA up? Well, I find this is super important about that 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Really interesting things that have magnesium, like nuts and seeds. Bananas are intriguingly really high in vitamin B6 and potassium, and fish are just really good on this. I never have MSG. MSG is basically just monosodium glutamate. It's going to way overstimulate the glutamate receptor. They hide it in food by calling it hydrolyzed protein, particularly hydrolyzed soy protein. Things like rice-a-roni and Pringles potato chips, those have a lot of MSG in them, and some Chinese food can have it. It's going to be a problem if you have this pattern. And again, we want that calcium and magnesium ratio to be good. And one thing I find good for me in this pattern is some L-glutamine, which is really high in chicken bone broth. I do some organic chicken bone broth. And inositol, I am a big dried apricot raisin fan. Cantaloupe's quite high, wheat germ, those things. So like a good quality whole wheat bread's good, or a pasta. And if we are postmenopausal women, I tried all of this. Short call, I say you could do a little DHEA. You gotta be cautious not to do too much. It could really push the system. You could do some estradiol with a medical doctor. That's a really great anti-inflammatory. I find that can be good. L-theanine, which is in green tea, valerian root. All of those things are going to kind of calm that system down, and you could try those. The real key is knowing you can fall asleep, knowing that you have the right form of B6. If you're on birth control pills, if you're on estradiol or any kind of postmenopausal hormone replacement, you are depleted in B6 to 50 milligrams. The RDA is about 1.7. You need a very high dose. I recommend this B6 as pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is the active form. You want to do it in the morning. B6 is a natural diuretic. You're probably going to lose a couple of pounds of water the first few days you're on it. You might notice that you're really having to go to the bathroom a lot. It will calm down, but when you first do it, it's really going to make a difference. And then just make sure you have your bananas and your potatoes so that you keep your potassium up. And the final one is, am I depressed and worried? That is, I have too little serotonin. Or am I panicky and I have diarrhea? So what can happen is in a high serotonin, now I have a diarrhea predominant irritable bowel, and this is a constipation predominant irritable bowel. This was discovered when they were doing SSRIs. So what we want is we want everything to be in balance. Now, the interesting thing is I have to eat a lot of good quality protein, and I have to have stomach acid so I can have tryptophan. Stomach acid needs zinc. So if I don't have enough zinc in my diet, then I can't make stomach acid. If I don't have enough B6, I can't make stomach acid. I don't have enough B1, I can't make stomach acid. But this only needs to be at the RDA. Tryptophan is high in things like anything from a cow. So dairy has a lot of tryptophan. So I'm a big fan of grass-fed yogurt or something like that. Pumpkin seeds very high, and turkey, all very high in tryptophan. Eggs. So you want to have those good quality proteins. We want to have enough folic acid, enough iron, calcium, and B3 for this enzyme to work. And why I put, the chocolate, interestingly, has iron in it. But if you're a menstruating woman, then you want to have 18 milligrams of iron. I like the iron bisglycinate. That seems to work best for my patients. So I like that a lot, but some kind of chelated iron. You can take 5-hydroxytryptophan, that is for this, but if you're running towards diarrhea and you take 5-hydroxytryptophan, you're going to get more diarrhea. That's the thing you want to be cautious about. And now you're going to have the emotion, oh shit, not so good. Now we're going to have trouble with our bowel because this is serotonin, and serotonin is what lets you poop because you serotonin, serotonin, serotonin. So too much diarrhea, too little constipation. Now the issue is I convert serotonin to melatonin in low light. So I have to get those lights down an hour before I go to bed. I don't want to have that screen on. I don't want to have bright lights. I want to let melatonin turn on, but this is a SAMe-dependent enzyme. When I give my methyl group from serotonin to melatonin, this becomes homocysteine, and that means I have to go back from the SAMe to magnesium. That needs B6, B9, and B12 in the right form. And without that, then I up my risk of cardiovascular disease. So it's a problem. And we don't want to have too much copper because it's going to mess all this up. So as I say to the students, don't suck on any batteries. So it's not that easy to get copper, too much copper in your diet, but this is why we didn't put in high dose of the microminerals in the shake, because I didn't want to put too much copper and mess the system up. Again, we need those proteins. We need magnesium to do this pattern, or we're never going to be able to sleep. Between the magnesium and the NMDA receptor and the magnesium that it takes to make melatonin at night, I call this, one of my patients calls this the placebo effect. He's like, oh, your placebo really worked for me. And that is 300 milligrams of magnesium and 1 milligram of melatonin. This is like my magic formula if you can't fall asleep. Works every time. 1 milligram melatonin, 300 milligrams magnesium. It just kind of really calms the system down. And then you really are going to both be able to have a great night's sleep and antioxidants. Now, it won't keep you asleep. If you're waking up between 1 and 3 in the morning, that is not a melatonin problem. That is, you did not carb load enough the night before. More potatoes, more complex carbs, more calories before you go to bed. So I'm calm, I'm pooping every day, I'm getting a good night's sleep. no diarrhea, no constipation, everything's perfect. That is a gut feeling. Women have more serotonin receptors in their brain than men. When we say we have a gut feeling, we mean we have a gut feeling. It just doesn't feel right in my gut. Absolutely. Men have more dopamine receptors. That's why if they do the dishes, you have to be like, oh, honey, that's great job. You did the dishes. We've done 60 things. We don't need anybody to say good job. But when we have a gut feeling, we want us to be listened to. It is a difference in male, female brains on serotonin versus dopamine receptors. Let's see what people are. Oatmeal, good to help people stay asleep. Intriguingly, Dr. Zach, I think yes. A good quality, high fiber with some protein, maybe an hour or two before you go to bed. If you're having trouble staying asleep between 1 and 3, bowl of oatmeal is a really great idea. Even a bowl of organic Cheerios. Intriguingly, you want to eat wheat, corn, soy, and oats organic. Otherwise, they have Roundup in them, and that's just horrible for you. So I only have organic oatmeal and organic Cheerios. They're not Cheerio brands, but the little round things, organic. So again, we don't want to have panic and exhaustion, and we don't want to be depressed, worried, and can't sleep. So we really want to be balanced. And so the foods that are high are milk, turkey, and eggs. And so what I say to patients is you want to look at your bowel, and if you're getting diarrhea, you want to cut back on your cow dairy, you want to cut back on your turkey and cut back on your eggs. It's too much tryptophan. Pumpkin seeds also, pumpkin very, very high in tryptophan. But if you're not going, you want to add them in. So this is kind of where the art comes in. How much of this, how much I shouldn't do. It really interesting about this really intriguing balance. Now, the more fiber I eat, the more serotonin I'll also make. So a higher fiber diet is going to be really great for serotonin, because when I stretch it, I then have to contract it. That needs serotonin. And so that's really helpful as well. And then again, this interesting reaction here, where I'm going to put this hydroxyl group, that's a vitamin C dependent pathway again. So that's why we want to have our fruits and vegetables so that I can do that step. What we have to be very, very careful about is we cannot have St. John's wort. If we have St. John's wort and we're on antibiotics, if we're on St. John's wort and we're on hormone replacement therapy, or we're doing birth control pills, St. John's wort is going to totally mess up your cytochrome P450 system. You're going to detoxify the drug. You're not going to get the positive benefit. It's really totally and completely contraindicated. I'm not a fan of St. John's wort. It has the highest number of herb drug interactions of anything, and you can get excess serotonin syndrome, which can lead to suicide. So absolutely not. And if patients, or you know somebody that's on a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that I'm showing you here, this is not the person that you're going to be like, oh, I saw this presentation and you're just going to change your diet. This has to be managed with their medical doctor. This has to be managed with them looking at their symptoms, because if I start to increase my serotonin by increasing my tryptophan foods and increasing my fiber, I can get serotonin syndrome. So very cautious. If people are on these drugs, they have to talk to their medical doctor. They have to talk to their therapist. And then as they start to do the food changes, then they can do this. So if they're getting diarrhea, that something is awry, too much meds or too much serotonin foods. And so again, we want to have the right amount of protein with the right amount, but we really want fiber. Fiber is so critical to tell your body to make the serotonin. Like, you're not making serotonin for no reason. You have to stretch the colon, so in response, you make serotonin. It's why I like to put stuff in the shake, or I like to have something with it that's going to be a stretcher that stretches that stomach, stretches your colon, and now I'm going to get a better response and more serotonin. And then when I have that in low light, I'll make melatonin. Some people take 5-HTP. That's only if you really, really need it. B6, again, I'm on birth control pills. I'm on hormone replacement therapy. I'm on antibiotics. That's going to deplete B6. So we got to take extra. Here's the C, having your 5 cups of fruits and vegetables. And again, L-glutamine, intriguingly good for this. That's again the bone broth, or that's really the highest thing in L-glutamine. And so really a lot of the very same things that we had before. So it's really a lot of the same treatment will fix everything. It's just, how are we doing this? There's a great book, intriguingly, called Potatoes, Not Prozac. And potatoes, when I have especially like sweet potatoes that have a lot of fiber, it will really up your serotonin. Oh, thank you, Stace. All right, and we want to try to sleep, so you want to have the right amount. All right, because anxiety and depression need all the same vitamins and minerals, this is why you can feel sometimes like you're both anxious and depressed. You're both afraid and you're depressed. You're like, oh, right? And so we want to have all of these things, especially vitamin C. This is why people are eating not enough fruits and vegetables and not having enough fiber and not having enough calories. Super, super important. We need to make our own SAMe. We need methionine and good quality protein. We need our magnesium, which is also depleted by birth control pills and hormone replacement therapy, and why I take extra. If we're menstruating, we need 18 milligrams of iron every day. Pregnant women need, in their 3rd trimester, 25. And then we need B1, B2, B3 energy, B5, pantothenic acid, but then we also need B6 as pyridoxal 5-phosphate, maybe as many as 50 milligrams if we're on birth control pills. And then we want to have good quality folic acid and methyl B12 so that we can get rid of the homocysteine, which you can have checked for on your blood work to make sure you're taking everything in the right form, and that's going to keep going down.